We thought we had found our forever home, a quiet, picturesque neighborhood where Sarah could finally have the peace she deserved. After months of searching, Pinecrest Gardens seemed perfect. A beautiful single-story home with wide doorways and smooth flooring, ideal for Sarah's wheelchair. No more struggling up steps, no more squeezing through narrow hallways. Just comfort, independence, and a fresh start. That illusion shattered the moment we met Deborah Morgan. It happened on the 4th day after we moved in. I was unpacking the last of the kitchen boxes when, bang, 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 a loud knock, sharp and demanding. It wasn't the polite kind of knock a neighbor makes to welcome you. No, this was the kind that made my stomach twist. I opened the door to a woman dressed in a pristine red blazer, nails polished to match. She was smiling, but not the warm, friendly kind. This was the type of smile that came with an agenda. "Mr. Taylor, I presume," she said, extending her manicured hand. "I'm Deborah Morgan, president of the Pinecrest Gardens Homeowners Association. Welcome to the community." Homeowners Association? Our realtor had never mentioned anything about an HOA. I hesitated before shaking her hand. "Thank you. We're still settling in." "Yes, I can see that." Her eyes flickered past me, scanning our half-unpacked living room. "I'm here to officially welcome you," and she reached into her designer bag, pulling out a thick folder. "Get you signed up for the HOA." I frowned. Signed up? Deborah's smile tightened. "It's mandatory. All homeowners must join. The monthly fee is only $350. My stomach dropped. $350? For what? "That's quite a lot," I said carefully. "It covers landscaping, community events, and property value protection." She cut in. "It's what keeps Pinecrest Gardens the most desirable neighborhood in the county." Just then, I heard the software of Sarah's wheelchair coming down the hallway. "James, who is it?" I turned as Sarah rolled up beside me. Her long brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail, her face still tired from the move. "This is Deborah Morgan from the HOA." I explained. Sarah smiled warmly. "Nice to meet you. We're excited to be here. The layout is perfect for my needs." Deborah's eyes flickered to Sarah's wheelchair, then to the small ramp we had installed over the front step. Her expression barely shifted, but I saw it, the brief tightening of her jaw. "About that," she said smoothly, "any exterior modifications require pre-approval from the architectural committee." Sarah's smile faltered. "It's just a ramp. I needed to get in and out of the house." "Rules are rules," Deborah said, slipping another form from her folder. "Submit a request, and we'll review it next month." Next month? Sarah needed that ramp now. My gut told me we had just become targets. And I was right. The very next morning, we found a bright yellow violation notice taped to our front door. "Unapproved modification. Remove wheelchair ramp immediately." My blood boiled. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. Sarah wheeled up beside me, reading the notice with a tight jaw. "They're punishing us because of me, aren't they?" she asked quietly. I clenched the paper in my fist. Let's see how far they're willing to push this. We decided to ignore the notice. Sarah needed that ramp, and no rule was going to change that. That night, I dug deeper. After a few hours of online searches, I found something disturbing. 6 months ago, several homeowners had fought against the HOA's creation. They never agreed to it when they bought their homes, just like us. But somehow, the HOA still gained control, changing rules, issuing fines, and forcing people to sell their homes at unfair prices. One comment stood out. They targeted Mrs. Wilson, an 80-year-old widow, until she had no choice but to sell. Deborah bought her house for half its value. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't just dealing with a strict HOA. This was a system built on fear. Within days, the violations escalated. Our mailbox was non-compliant. Our house numbers were the wrong size. Our trash cans were placed 2 inches too far from the curb. Each notice came with a fine. $100 per day for the ramp, Sarah read aloud one morning, gripping the latest letter in disbelief. Enough was enough. I contacted a property lawyer. They can't do this, she confirmed. An HOA formed after your home was purchased cannot force you to join. And they certainly can't fine you for an accessibility modification. Armed with this knowledge, I wrote a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA. I sent it certified mail. The next day, Deborah showed up again. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Taylor," she warned, her red lips curling into a thin smile. A threat. I had no idea how far she was willing to go, until it was too late. The retaliation came fast. First, we received false complaints. A police officer knocked on our door. Someone reported an illegal business being run from this address. Sarah's physical therapist had been mistaken for clients. Next, landscapers showed up unannounced. HOA orders. One said, "Trimming our lawn without permission." Said you'd argue, but we're doing it anyway. Then, our power mysteriously went out. I called the electric company. "Your meter was tampered with," they told me. I stared at our darkened house, heart pounding. This wasn't a coincidence. But the worst came the next morning. Sarah screamed. I bolted out of bed, heart hammering. I found her on the porch, tears streaming down her face. Her wheelchair was chained to the railing, a heavy padlock. A bright orange violation notice taped to her lap. Unapproved ramp, $500 daily fine. My hands shook as I yanked at the metal links. Our security camera had caught everything. 5:43 a.m. Deborah Morgan and her team sneaking onto our property, laughing as they locked my wife in place. I felt pure, burning rage. "James," Sarah whispered, voice trembling. "What do we do now?" I clenched my fists. We fight, and I knew just who to call. The governor. We had proof. The security footage showed everything. Deborah Morgan and her HOA cronies sneaking onto our property, chaining my wife's wheelchair to the porch like she was nothing more than an object to control. I thought it would be an open and shut case. Call the police, show them the video, and watch these people face consequences. I was wrong. 40 minutes later, Officer Jenkins arrived. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s. His badge gleamed in the morning sun as he watched the video on my phone. He nodded, his face unreadable. "That's certainly concerning," he said, shifting on his feet. "Concerning?" I echoed, my anger rising. This is a crime. My wife was physically restrained against her will. Jenkins sighed, lowering his voice. "Look, Mr. Taylor, I hear you, but—" He hesitated. Deborah Morgan's husband is best friends with the police chief. They vacation together. Their kids are married. A chill ran through me. "Are you saying nothing will be done?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp despite the pain in her eyes. "I'm saying," Jenkins said carefully, "these neighborhood disputes get messy. Maybe it's easier if you just join the HOA. I saw red. Sarah reached over and grabbed my hand. "We're not joining, James," she said firmly. "That's exactly what they want." Jenkins sighed again. "I'll file a report, but don't expect much," he muttered before walking back to his cruiser. As he drove off, I turned to Sarah. "If the system won't protect us," I said, voice tight with rage, "we'll find someone who will." Her eyes were already set with determination. "Then it's time to call Beth." Beth, Governor Elizabeth Reynolds. Sarah's old friend, her former law school roommate, the one person in power who couldn't be bought. That night, I stayed up digging deeper. If we were going to fight, we needed to know exactly what we were up against. And what I found, it was so much worse than I imagined. The HOA was never legally registered. They filed paperwork 5 years ago, but it was rejected for missing homeowner signatures. Legally, they had zero authority over us, or anyone else. A pattern of forced sales. The HOA harassed elderly and disabled homeowners until they sold. The buyers? A company called Morgan Development Group, Deborah's brother's company. Millions of dollars stolen. The HOA collected over $850,000 in dues and fines. Only $47,000 went to actual neighborhood maintenance. The rest? Funneled into personal bank accounts, vacation homes, and even a yacht. I stared at the documents, my heart racing. This wasn't about rules. This was a criminal enterprise. And we were about to blow it wide open. Sarah sat beside me, flipping through the files. We need to take this to the media, I said. She shook her head. Deborah's cousin runs the local newspaper. They'll bury it. Then she smiled, a slow, knowing smile. We don't need the media, she said. We have something better. I frowned. What? She turned the photo album toward me. An old picture of her and Governor Reynolds. Beth always kept her promises, she said. It's time to remind her of one. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she dialed the number. I held my breath. 3 rings. Then, Sarah? The voice on the other end was warm, familiar, and powerful. Beth remembered. For the next 10 minutes, Sarah explained everything. The harassment, the false violations, the power outages, the wheelchair chaining. I watched as her old friend transformed from a caring voice into a woman on a mission. Send me everything, Beth said, her voice suddenly sharp. The videos, the financial records, everything. Sarah nodded. What happens next? Beth's voice was calm. Now, she said. Now we let them think they've won. The governor's team worked fast. Within hours, a press release went out. Sarah Taylor appointed the State Housing Rights Commission, a real position, a public position, and one that sent Deborah Morgan into full-blown panic. The very next morning, she showed up at our door again. But this time, she wasn't alone. 5 men in suits, a locksmith, and one final threat. We're here for an emergency inspection, Deborah said, shoving a fake legal document into my hands. You have unauthorized modifications. I glanced down. It was pure nonsense. You're not coming in, I said. Tom Morgan, the HOA treasurer, stepped forward, pushing against the door. Open it, or we will. My pulse pounded. Sarah pressed a hidden panic button under her wheelchair's armrest. A second later, sirens. Not just one, not just 2, 6 police cruisers. Deborah's smug smile vanished. She turned, staring in shock as state troopers, not local police, stepped out, weapons drawn. Her hand shook as a woman in a sleek suit approached, flashing her badge. Deborah Morgan, you are under investigation for fraud, harassment, and illegal property intimidation. Deborah paled. This is a mistake, she stammered. You don't understand. No, the woman cut her off. You don't understand. We've been watching you for months. And now, she smirked, now we have everything we need. The next 5 minutes were pure chaos. Deborah screamed as they cuffed her. Tom tried to run. He didn't make it far. The locksmith? He dropped his tools and fled. Then a black SUV pulled up. The door opened, and Governor Elizabeth Reynolds stepped out. Deborah froze. Her face went white. You, she choked out. Beth smiled. Yes, me. She turned to Sarah, clasping her hand. Ready to make housing history again, counselor? Sarah nodded, tears her eyes. More ready than you know. And just like that, the reign of the corrupt HOA was over. But this fight was just getting started. Because what started as one family's battle was about to change lives forever. Deborah Morgan's world shattered in seconds. The HOA queen who had ruled Pinecrest Gardens with an iron fist now stood handcuffed in our front yard. Her red blazer no longer a symbol of control, but a badge of her downfall. You can't do this, she shrieked at the state troopers. Do you know who my husband is? Governor Reynolds stepped forward, her expression icy calm. Yes, she said, and he's next. The troopers weren't just here for Deborah. They were here for everyone. Tom Morgan, the HOA treasurer, the real estate developer behind the 4 sales. Clea Henderson, the HOA secretary, the one who faked signatures to make the HOA legal. Margaret Wu, the enforcement officer, the one who hand-delivered the fines and threats. One by one, they were arrested. This is harassment. Tom yelled. We were protecting our neighborhood. A female investigator stepped forward, holding up a thick folder of evidence. Protecting it, she repeated, because according to these financial records, you were using HOA funds to buy yourself a vacation home. Tom blanched. The neighborhood had gathered. People who once feared Deborah now watched in stunned silence. Some even cheered. the woman who had ruled over them, who had terrorized homeowners and stolen their money, was now being shoved into the back of a police car. And the best part? We had started it. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, reporters swarmed Pinecrest Gardens. Microphones were shoved toward us. How did this all start? Why did the HOA target you? How does it feel to take down one of the most corrupt HOAs in the state? Sarah rolled forward, her hands steady on the wheels of her chair. Her voice didn't tremble. This isn't just about us, she said. 17 families were bullied by these people. Elderly homeowners forced to sell. Disabled residents treated like burdens. That stops today. Governor Reynolds stood beside her. We will be launching a full statewide investigation into HOA corruption, she announced. And Sarah Taylor will be leading the charge. The cameras flashed. Sarah blinked in shock. Wait, what? The governor smiled. Sarah, you spent your career fighting for housing rights before your illness. We need you now more than ever. I looked at my wife, asterisk, asterisk, my strong, incredible wife, asterisk, asterisk, and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. A spark, a fire. I won't let this happen to another family, she said. I squeezed her hand. Then let's make sure it never does. The investigation moved fast. Over the next few months, the FBI uncovered millions of dollars in stolen HOA fees hidden in offshore accounts. The judge overseeing the case refused Deborah's plea deal. The court ruled that Pinecrest Gardens HOA was illegally formed. All fines, fees, and violations were nullified. Displaced homeowners were reimbursed their forced sales with interest. And Deborah? She stood before the judge, lip trembling as he read her sentence. You preyed on the elderly, the disabled, and the vulnerable, he said. I have no sympathy for you. 8 years in prison. No parole. The courtroom gasped. Deborah's face went pale. I turned to Sarah, who was watching without a hint of pity. She thought she was untouchable, she whispered. Now she knows what it's like to feel powerless. Pinecrest Gardens changed. The fear that once hovered over the neighborhood was gone. Where once there were threats, there were now smiles. Where once people hid, they now stood together. One afternoon, as Sarah and I sat on our newly approved wheelchair-accessible porch, we saw something that made us pause. Across the street, a moving truck pulled up. A young family stepped out. A little girl, no older than 8, carefully rolled down a wheelchair ramp, her tiny hands gripping the wheels. Sarah's breath hitched. The girl looked around nervously until she saw Sarah. Their eyes met, and Sarah smiled. Welcome to Pinecrest Gardens, she called out. The girl's face lit up. Her parents visibly relaxed. This was a place where she belonged, where no one could tell her she didn't. Late that night, I found Sarah flipping through old photographs. Pictures of her before multiple sclerosis changed everything. Do you ever wish things had been different? I asked softly. She closed the album. I wish I had been chained to our porch, she admitted. Then she looked at me. But look what came from it. I swallowed hard. She was right. That chain was meant to break her. Instead, it made her stronger, a fighter, a leader, a voice for people who had none. And the world had taken notice. The next morning, a letter arrived. Sarah read it twice before looking up, eyes wide. It's from the State Bar, she whispered. They want me to lead a new committee on disability rights law. I smiled. What do you think? She took a deep breath, then grinned. I think Deborah Morgan made the biggest mistake of her life messing with my wife. The end.